Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of the Prospect podcast. How should foreign leaders treat Donald Trump? It's the question that's on the lips of many world leaders and diplomats around the world at the moment, and we thought we'd discuss it today. My name's Benjamin Clark, and I'm joined by Sam Fowles. Sam is a lawyer and a writer who's written a piece for us at Prospect back in January suggesting that Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, shouldn't cozy up to Donald Trump. Since then, a hell of a lot has happened. Keir Starmer and Donald Trump have met in the White House. Volodymyr Zelensky also had a rather infamous meeting with Donald Trump in the White House that had a rather different tone to Starmer's. So we'll discuss all of that today. But first up, Sam, to rewind the clock a little bit, let's go back to January when you wrote your piece. Why did you write the piece, and why did you think at that stage that it was, that leaders needed to be warned against cozying up to Trump too much?
Well, to be honest, I think I wrote the piece because it looked like Starmer was going down the path that he has exactly gone down. He looked like he was going to cozy up to Trump, and he appears to have done exactly that. For me, though, there is sort of two key issues. The first is that Starmer cozying up to Trump is never going to work because ultimately it is in Trump's interests to remove Starmer. Trump is part of a global far-right or far-right adjacent movement, and that includes groups like AfD in Germany, people like Viktor Orban in Hungary, but also increasingly groups like Reform in the UK or Kemi Badenoch's Conservative Party. It's always going to be in Trump's interest to have either Nigel Farage or Kemi Badenoch boosted or even in power in the UK. And so for Keir Starmer to sort of cozy up to him is never ultimately going to get the payoff that Starmer wants. Secondly, and I think more importantly, Starmer has an opportunity when in government to set the agenda, but more than that, to set the bounds of what proper political debate should be. And by cozying up to Trump, he sends the signal that proper political debate involves far-right or far-right adjacent ideas. It involves conspiracy theories. It involves doing deals with people who are adjudicated sexual offenders, adjudicated electoral fraudsters. And bringing these groups into the mainstream isn't just about doing a deal with another country. It's about saying what is and is not acceptable in mainstream political discourse in the UK. So when Starmer normalizes Trump, he normalizes these far-right discourses. He normalizes these misogynistic discourses. He normalizes a type of politics that is inimical to democracy, to democracy, but also is a type of politics that Labour is never going to win. So Starmer is effectively sort of signing his own electoral death warrant with this.
Yeah, interesting. And so I guess that was your perspective back in January, and you noted that Starmer has taken that course that you warned him not to since then. But if perhaps we can elaborate a little bit on what has happened since then. So obviously there's been the visit to Washington from Starmer, and there's been a number of other, world leaders who have, lined up to meet with Donald Trump and try to influence him. How have you seen these meetings between Trump and world leaders that have happened since then? And do you think that corroborates your initial assumptions, or has there been anything that has challenged your views?
No, I think every meeting that a world leader has had with Trump, with the exception of the phone call with Vladimir Putin, every meeting that a leader of a democratic state has enhanced Trump and diminished that leader. And that is partly presentational because Trump demands that effectively. Trump demands that leaders effectively bow and scrape to him. And we saw with the meeting with Zelensky, when Zelensky quite reasonably challenged Trump in a very kind of quite polite and almost restrained way compared to how Zelensky has spoken in other contexts. It provoked this incredible attack and an incredible backlash. And of course, many analyses suggest that backlash was predetermined. They were just looking for an excuse. But I do think it's really instructive how Zelensky simply saying, look, if my country's future is going to be discussed, then I want my country to be at the table. That's a very, very simple, uncontroversial statement. And yet, because it didn't fit the Trump playbook, because it wasn't bowing and scraping, he got both barrels. What Starmer has done, I think, massively diminished him on a global scale, and in sort of going to Trump and presenting a letter from the King, inviting him to the UK, it made Starmer look very much like the weaker party, not just in terms of geopolitics, and of course the UK is not; it doesn't have the same size economy or military or anything as the US, but it made Starmer look like the morally weaker party, that he was conceding to Trump's ideas and to the superiority of the type of politics and ideas that Trump, not the US, Trump represents. And I think that was incredibly damaging and really put him on a back foot going into the negotiations over the weekend. And you'll see that most of this, if you read the kind of global press, then so many people are commenting on this fundamental contradiction in what Starmer is saying. And of course, Trump did exactly what anyone could have predicted Trump would do, which was, as soon as those negotiations had concluded, he fundamentally undermined them by ending aid to Ukraine. And so just all that work that Starmer did, everything that he was trying to do in bringing Trump in stroking his ego, trying to treat him like a sort of normal politician, came to naught because Trump had that end of blockage of aid in the chamber, and he waited until it was going to be the most humiliating moment, and then he fired the bullet.
I guess to play devil's advocate a bit here and to try to test your argument a little, I guess some in the diplomatic establishment, might say, look, you make some compelling moral points there, Sam, but diplomacy is a hard-nosed game. You need to check some of your ideological commitments at the door. You need to go into these negotiating rooms with clear eyes and with no moral sentiments. Do you see any merit in that? Could you give any credence to the approach that has been taken by the UK establishment particularly?
I think that idea is actually very naive, because it boils the UK's national interest down to what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes. The UK's national interest lies in a stable global community based on diplomacy and based on democracy, where democracy is seen as the norm and the gold standard. And along with that comes a rules-based international system. So the UK is a medium-sized power, possibly dropping a little bit down that scale now, but still a medium-sized power. We're interested in global markets. We're interested in trade. We're interested in capitalism. We need a rules-based system. So the UK's national interest ultimately lies in maintaining this rules-based system with democracy as the gold standard. So when Keir Starmer is prepared to give that up and make concessions about a rules-based international order, about a democratic international order, to achieve maybe a short-term goal, well, I think that's incredibly naive, and I don't think it's hard-nosed. I don't think it's checking our morals at the door. I think actually insisting on upholding the rules-based international system is the realpolitik way of doing things. And if we give that up, we are simply not strong enough to operate effectively in a sort of might is right tripolar world, which is what Trump is leading us towards, where you have essentially three great powers, Russia, China, and the United States, dividing up the world between them. That doesn't help our trade because it means we don't have a stable regulatory sphere for trade. It doesn't help our diplomatic interests because, frankly, we can be ignored. And it doesn't help our security either, because our security relies on people playing by the rules and also states resolving their disputes within the framework of the international rules-based order. The whole aim of what Trump is trying to do is legitimize resolving disputes outside that rules-based order, to tear down that rules-based order, to say, look, if you're big enough, you can nip over and invade, nick someone else's territory, annex as much as you want, and as long as you're one of the in crowd, one of the oligarchs, well then you get a big tick for that. That's not in the UK's interest.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. If we could go a little bit further in trying to test this argument here. So I guess some of the specific tactics that have been used. Starmer offered Trump a second state visit, one of the only leaders to have that second state visit offered to them. One could say that in trying to win over Trump in this way, some of these diplomats and Starmer himself may indeed be trying to play on some of Trump's weaknesses. Some of those weaknesses might be that Trump is easily distracted by, new shiny objects. So you dangle a state visit in front of him and he might be, inclined to look that way and not look at, some of the other areas in which the UK and the US might have some disagreements, or at least not get as upset about those as he might otherwise. And Trump is clearly prone to flattery. He has a significant opinion of himself and he likes hearing that from other people as well. And so do you see Keir Starmer's efforts to try to stroke Trump's ego a little bit, to offer him some nice things? Could you concede that might be, some canny real politics there? Or do you still think that that's, a little too obsequious for your liking?
I think Starmer definitely thinks it's canny realpolitik, but I don't think it is, because if all of this were happening in a darkened room and no one else was seeing it, and Keir Starmer walked in and gave Trump the crown jewels and let him dress up and parade around in front of the mirror, and no one saw, then fantastic, maybe that would work. That's how that tactic works. The problem with international diplomacy, is other people see what you're doing. So when Trump gets his parade, when he gets to ride in the gold coach, when he gets the King of England, all of the history and pomp and circumstance that we reserve for our most honoured guests, setting aside whether you think the King of England is a good thing, but that essentially the highest honour we can bestow on a foreign leader, an honour that we haven't bestowed on people who are genuinely great leaders as well. Well, then that says Labour think, the UK thinks that Trump is worthy of this. But Trump is not an entity in and of himself. Trump symbolises a way of doing politics. Trump symbolises effectively the global far right, or the global far right adjacent. And so what Keir Starmer is doing is giving a big tick, welcoming the global far right into, or the global far right adjacent, into the mainstream of political debate, and saying their ideas are legitimate. Their ideas are something to be respected, not just respected, but honoured. And actually, citizens of Britain to be bowed and scraped before, as we are supposed to bow and scrape before the monarchy and the gold coach and all of that. And so actually what Starmer is doing is maybe he'll manipulate Trump a bit. Maybe he'll get a trade concession in the short term, although it hasn't worked so far, as I've already said. But what he will also do is empower not just the political opponents of Labour, but the political opponents of democracy itself. Trump and the movement he represents are not interested in democracy. They're interested in oligarchy, and legitimizing oligarchy and honouring oligarchy is, again, a supreme strategic and political error.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So I guess moving forward from your critique of Starmer's approach so far, and the approach of many other world leaders towards action, right? What do we do about it? So you advocated in your piece for us in January that Starmer show more backbone. I guess I'm wondering what that would look like. I guess, I'm imagining the scene with Hugh Grant from Love Actually, where he, storms in and and gives him a stern telling off. But I don't imagine that's what you're thinking about, Sam. So would you like to elucidate what could it look like specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it is. What I'm advocating is unprecedented action, but these are unprecedented times. It's not something that I would have advocated even in the era of George W. Bush, or had Mitt Romney won the presidency, even though I didn't agree with their politics. But they worked within the basic format of Western democracy, rather than trying to undermine that format. So I think fundamentally, Starmer needs to look towards Europe, which he has begun to do. And I think that's the right choice, and bringing Europeans together and saying, what is the European answer to the Russia-Ukraine issue? That's the right way of going about it. But to then say, well, actually, all of this depends on American security guarantees, which Trump is then going to turn around and say, well, you're not going to have, fundamentally undermines all the great work that Starmer did over the weekend. But it's not just about security, it's about economics as well. And in this way, I think Starmer can embrace or start to get ahead of trends that have been going on, economic trends that have been going on for some time. Every economist since about 1980 has been writing about how the nations other than the United States are going to be growing and competing with the United States, and markets other than the United States need to be exploited. I think focusing our economy so it doesn't depend on a trade deal with the United States is vital, and that means building ties with Europe. Also means building ties with South America, ties with Africa, ties with Asia, and we've been really bad, actually, at that so far. And since Brexit, our trade policy is very much focused on just trying to get a couple of, big sort of showy wins that we can put in the press. But these have actually the agreements we've made have actually made very little impact on our economy at all. So what Starmer needs to do is really focus on trying to achieve genuine trade wins with other states beyond the United States, and particularly with Europe, and trying to repair some of the damage that Brexit did there, so that the UK is not reliant on the US in a trade sense. But at the same time, Starmer has to accept that US trade sanctions, US trade embargoes, all of the various different things that Trump has got in his armory will impact the UK. There's no getting away from that. So rather than try and give away the house in order to avoid or minimize this impact, we need to see government action to protect British industry and British services from those impacts. And that means government investment in these areas. And I think Starmer's economic approach so far has very much been hoping the private sector sort of jumps in to sort of solve the underinvestment crisis that we've been suffering for about 10 years, on really not that much more than the fact that his government isn't the last government. People aren't going to invest unless the government sets the ball rolling. The economy isn't going to be stimulated unless the government stimulates it. So what we need to see is massive public investment to stimulate the economy, which will at the same time protect us from the impacts of Trump's economic shenanigans. We can put them like that.
Yeah, interesting. I guess you saying that you'd like to see stronger ties with Europe. Have you been heartened by some of the responses from European leaders, from Starmer himself, but others standing behind Zelensky after his visit to the White House?
Yeah, very much so. And I think it was an example of the statesman that Starmer could be. I know I've criticised Starmer, but I genuinely believe that Starmer could be a great prime minister, a great world leader. He's got that potential, and we saw a little bit of that at the weekend. It's not really since Gordon Brown have you seen a British prime minister gather the world leaders together and say, "Look, let's get here is my solution to the crisis. Let's work together on this." Now, of course, when Gordon Brown did it in 2007, it worked, and he achieved very, very swift very swift action, very effective action, with the US on board. And Barack Obama, the new president, was very keen to sort of get on board with what Brown was doing.
This is in relation to the global financial crisis, correct?
That's the global financial crisis. Now, Starmer hasn't achieved that yet. Starmer he's made a really good start. He's brought European leaders together. He's clearly won some respect in doing that. But he has hamstrung himself in two ways. First, on making it effective, any effective European action basically dependent on the US sign-off. And second, not seeing the slap that was coming down the line from Trump in cutting off military aids to Ukraine. So I think it's a really positive step. It shows what he could be, but I would love to see him embrace that side of himself, embrace that side of his policy, and become a genuine leader rather than a prime minister who's waiting around for the US sign-off.
Yeah, interesting. I guess final question, to move away from just Trump, the man. There are a lot of people in the Maga orbit at the moment, I guess especially Elon Musk, who has some thoughts, let's say, about British politics in particular, often expressed at around about 3 or 4 a.m. US time, rather concerningly. I guess, what do you think about how the UK government, but other governments around the world, should relate to the broader MAGA movement and the broader Trump administration, other than just Trump himself? Obviously, Trump, at the end of the day, operates like a bit of a gangster, and so, everything does come down to his say-so. But there's also a lot of things going on beyond his remit that sometimes I'm not even sure whether he's aware of them.
I think the MAGA movement isn't particularly original or particularly new. It's doing what every oligarchic movement in the US, in the UK, in France, in Israel and Australia, anywhere, has always done, which is trying to consolidate political and economic power within the hands of a small number of people. And Trump did that during his last administration. He's doing it in this administration. And so when you look at the wider MAGA movement, I think what, above all, world leaders need to do is resist that consolidation of power into unaccountable hands. So UK governments have, for example, given Musk and other social media owners essentially a free pass for quite a long time. They've been allowed to essentially take control of the global public space, the global public square, the place where we have our conversations, our political discussions. Whereas the idea of the public square is James Madison's idea, and he was thinking literally of an open space in the middle of the town where you have debates. And now it's as if that open space has been closed off and controlled by one or two men, and it is men, and policed, and all the discourse that happened in that space has to take place according to their rules. Now, this is really inimical to democracy, because it means that we're not really having a free debate. We're having as much debate and on the terms as a very small number of oligarchs allow us. And so that's arguably a greater threat to Western democracy than Trump himself is, because it will outlast him, and it's probably more significant than him, and it sort of made him as well. So until Western leaders really tackle that control of the flow of information, the control of the flow of discourse, and that means looking at making algorithms transparent. It means forcing companies to tackle hate speech. It means actually getting involved and saying it's not okay for you to promote these views ahead of these other views if what you're doing is trying to create a global public square. For me, that's got to be the starting point of how leaders respond to the MAGA movement more generally. And then, of course, the other aspect is to tackle conspiracy theories, and this is related. The global far right and far right adjacent is fed by conspiracy theories. And there's some fascinating polling which suggests in the UK, for example, we're getting towards more than 50% of people actually believing these far-right conspiracy theories. So a really good example of that is about rape gangs, and we believe that this is a problem that is widespread and entirely about Muslim men. Where in fact in the UK, as I wrote in the column, gang-based child sexual exploitation is an offence that is far more likely to be committed by white men. But when people believe these conspiracy theories, when they fear them, then they're going to react more positively to politicians who say they will take radical action in respect of them, rather than politicians who are actually doing the sensible thing and trying to deal with real problems. So we need to see conspiracy theory as a genuine threat to our democracy and figure out a way to address that.
Sam, thanks very much for being on the show. I look forward to seeing you standing in the crowd and waving your flag when Trump comes for his state visit. And I look forward to seeing Keir Starmer take your advice and proceed to body slam Trump in number 10 Downing Street, perhaps with the help of Larry the Cat.
Well, I wouldn't mess with Larry the Cat.
Thanks very much, Sam.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching this bonus episode of the Prospect Podcast. To read the article that was referenced in the episode, click the link in our show notes. And to read more great journalism, head to prospectmagazine.co.uk.